Hello everyone, I'm here at Glossika headquarters in Taipei, and today I'm gonna interview Mike Campbell. Mike Campbell is the founder and CEO of Glossika. Mike, can you introduce yourself quickly? Tell us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Yes, well, I've always been interested in foreign languages, and I've been living most of my life here in Taiwan. Welcome to Taiwan. And it's nice to see people come and visit. And yeah, so Taiwan is in East Asia, so it's the language and culture is quite different than Europe, but it always provides a lot of things, new things to learn all the time. So that's why I've stayed for such a long time. And also, it was a big challenge to help people learn, the Western languages like English specifically. But of course, there are a lot of people who want to learn French and other languages. And so I spent a lot of time researching how we can help people become fluent. So they may already learn grammar and vocabulary in school, but it's always been a problem how to jump from, well, I have all of this book knowledge. How do I go to communication, expression? And so this was a major problem that I noticed most companies and services were unable to solve easily. And so I wanted to build a solution that could scale across languages. I have a big interest in many languages, so I wanted to be able to also build a solution that I could use myself. Yeah.
So you were teaching English in Taiwan, right?
Well,
that's one of your jobs when you started?
Actually, my background is in translation, and so I wasn't doing a lot of teaching, but I wanted to, I got a lot of requests to help people with this fluency problem. And so I ended up starting a lot of these test runs, like experiments with a lot of students. And so a lot of people signed up to take these experiments I was running to see if I could take them to fluency. Yeah.
Okay. So what did these experiments look like?
Well, I set up my own methodologies based on my research, and I ran these tests with a lot of classes here. And in about 2 or 3 years before I started building out Glossika.
Okay. So Glossika is the result of your research and your test with your students, right?
Yes.
And on yourself, I guess. As your
some tests were on myself. I tested myself on some very, I guess you could call them strange languages to see if I could actually acquire them. Because Taiwan has a lot of Aborigine languages and there aren't any resources to learn them. And so I tested myself to see if I could acquire one of these languages that has no resources.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then how did you create Glossika from there? When did you decide to create something like a formal method to learn a language?
Well, it's interesting because I remember while doing these training classes with the students, since I'm always learning other languages, I would always be thinking to myself, I really want to know how to say this sentence in Russian, or how to say this sentence in German or something, or in Japanese. And so even while I was focused on doing the training with other students, my brain was always thinking, oh, I don't know this one in like Russian or another language. And so it always, after the training class, I was always thinking, I wonder if I could actually build this out to other languages, because myself, I would be very interested in learning, how to get this kind of fluency in these other languages. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how it really growing out to so many different languages.
Okay.
It's a personal interest.
So there is so that's about the content. So it's mostly sentences, right?
Yes.
Why did you choose to use sentences to teach and learn a language with Glossika?
Well, there's a funny thing about languages is that if you, and I think this is true for French as well, for any language, if you look up one word in the dictionary, you'll see like maybe 10, 20 different meanings. And sometimes a word in English will have maybe 10 meanings. And if you look up that word in French, it will have 10 meanings, but it will have another word, and you look up that other word, and it may not be a what do you call it, a homonym with the other word. It may not be an exact same as the two words in French. So there is this, some words will match in the dictionary, but then some of the other words, they won't.
Yeah.
So there's always this mismatch. And so what happens is that these words, they must always occur together with other words. And the thing is, when you memorize vocabulary, you're only focusing on one word. You're not focusing on the words around it. For example, you can take most adjectives in French, and they will usually take some sort of preposition after it. You know, maybe if you're satisfied with somebody, you know, if I say satisfié or satisfié, what's the preposition?
You can say être satisfait de somebody or something. Yeah.
And so we would not say satisfied of in English. You have to say satisfied with in English. And so you might see, I know the word for satisfied in French, but I don't know what is the preposition after it. So for me, I can recognize lots and lots of French vocabulary, but I don't have the fluency to speak French because I don't know what is the correct word to join all of the phrases together. But if I use a system like Glossika and I start practicing my French, I already know a lot of vocabulary, and it's just a matter of linking which words will go together. And so with some languages like Russian, then you have the word endings, the consonant changes, and so you have to learn how the words are coming together in the sentence. So if you learn words outside of context, it's very, very difficult to reach fluency. And that's how most of the students are here in Taiwan. They've memorized the whole dictionary of English, but they can't speak. They can read. And the problem is that when they read, though, they have a bad understanding of English because there are so many phrases in English that have a special meaning when you put all the words together.
Yeah.
You know, like these phrasal verbs. And so they'll recognize all of the individual words, but they won't understand the phrase together. Like it won't make sense to them. And so that phraseology, you know, or these collocations, they're very, very important to acquire fluency.
Okay, so working with sentences made more sense in terms of translating, understanding vocabulary. What about grammar? Like a lot of people, when they start a language, they remember, you know, learning a language in school, and so they guess, you know, like their teachers knew what they were doing, the school system knew that what would be probably the best way to learn a language, and so they go back to learning grammar, tables, conjugations, and even if they don't start with that, at some point they really believe that it's required if you want to speak correctly. What do you think about that?
Yes, of course, grammar is important, but grammar is usually the kind of nuance that we want to express when we want to get our meaning across. So when you use the grammar correctly, then you are giving the right nuance for what you want to say. So if you don't know the grammar well, of course, the other person listening to you almost has to guess what is the exact meaning you want to say. So even if your grammar is wrong, you can still communicate. It's just harder for the listener. And they may want to switch to another language that's maybe easier to communicate. But as you go on, as you practice the language more and more, you really have to be aware. You have to listen to how native speakers use their language. For example, if you're learning a language like Russian, they have something called perfective. And this is quite different than, for example, our English or French perfect tense. Perfect, it encompasses both the time and aspect, but in Russian, it's only the aspect. And so the Russian perfective is similar to Chinese, like the word le in Chinese.
Just clicked something in my brain between these two languages. Okay, yeah, that's...
Yeah, so if you have learned both Chinese or Russian or tried both of them, then you will find that there is a better correlation between Chinese and Russian and Chinese le and Russian perfective than between Russian and the English or French like present perfect. And so the tricky thing about this is that when you're learning the language, you should realize, for example, бежать, like run in Russian, бежал, бегать, бегал. If you learn the past tense forms of these verbs, and you know them, you recognize them, like I can understand when somebody says the word, oh, I know he said run. Then you need to listen to what is the context that he's using that word in. Because that word will only be used in a specific context. Did he say, for example, he's running every day? He does it often? Or did he only did it once?
Yeah.
And then he will change to the perfective.
Yeah.
So there's usually a lot of agreement across the sentence and the specific word they will choose. Because Russian has a lot of verbs to choose from. And so it's sometimes confusing, like which verb should I use? And so it's hard to speak a language like Russian when you have so many choices to choose from. You don't know which word to use. But if you use it by listening, if you learn by listening to how native speakers speak, and you have to be aware, it really starts with understanding first. So listen a lot, but not just listen passively, but you need to listen, oh, he used that word specifically with another word in the sentence. And that's how it makes sense to native speakers. And so the grammar is only a very small part of it. The word endings, these are small parts of it. But the choice of the word is actually even more important. Because if you choose the wrong word, then you're not really getting your expression across.
Okay. And so you mentioned listening to the language a lot, working with sentences. So Glossika is based on these ideas. How does it work? How does it work? How do you learn a language with Glossika?
Well, we provide exposure to the sentence patterns. And so currently we have, I don't know what the exact number is, maybe 1,000 different sentence patterns in the system. But it's always increasing.
What would be a sentence pattern?
A sentence pattern would be, this is getting into linguistics, so there's some special terms, but you might have, basically, okay, if I just use a simple example, if I use the word teach, how many things can we attach in the sentence to the word teach? For example, I teach you Russian. I have I, you, and Russian. There are 3 parts added to this word teach. But if I tell her to help me teach you Russian, then I have 1, 2, 3, 4 things now in the sentence, right?
Okay.
So you can increase the sentence length by adding more complexity. But what happens in a language where I ask somebody to help me to do something else? Sometimes the grammar will shift. Sometimes words will move around in the sentence. Some languages like Japanese or German have this kind of funny movement around in the sentence, and then so it can become more and more complex. I think Turkish would have similar situation where it becomes more and more complex. Whereas in Chinese, basically you would just add one word after another. Yeah. In a sequence, which it's actually easier to express in Chinese. And in Russian, I think it would be easier to express. But in some languages, it can be quite complex. And so by adding more and more things into the sentence, you're getting a more complex, what I call a complex causative. You get a complex sentence pattern.
Okay, so in Glossika, that would look like I'm starting learning a language with Glossika. In the beginning, I would have short sentences, like, for example, I teach. That would be like one of the sentences I would get translated in the language I'm learning. And then like, I teach you, you a language, things like that. Right. Okay, so it gets more and more complex with time.
And so you also notice on the other side, you have a student who learns and a student who studies. And so there's often some kind of confusion between these two verbs.
Oh, yeah, you mean like as an example?
As an example,
okay.
yeah. The words to study and the word to learn, they have two different meanings in English. But in some languages, they will only have one verb.
Yeah.
And in some languages, they'll have more verbs than the English. So how do we express it? Well, we have to understand what is the original meaning of the sentence that we're... So for example, I'm learning German. Well, learn in English generally tends to mean to master. Like it's a long time and then I intend to get to my goal. Whereas I'm studying, there is no specific goal.
Yeah.
So in fact, German has both of these verbs, lernen and studieren. But they're often swapped in their usage from English.
Yeah.
So if I'm studying my homework, in German they would say lernen and not studieren.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that sometimes the verbs will swap in similar languages like English and German.
Yeah.
But in a language like Chinese, you would have to add something like 学会, like to learn to mastery. When you want to translate the word for learn.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the important idea that a lot of people don't understand that, like you realize quickly when you learn, like multiple languages that are really different, is that a word it's really hard to make a translation match. And that's actually something that in a lot of apps, people don't realize, but it's the way the vocabulary, the lessons are created is really lazy, because they pick words that are easy to translate. So they will pick colors, days of the week.
Exactly. You're exactly right. Because the biggest problem with most of those apps, and I've even bought books that have like lists of vocabulary words, because I'm very interested in these things. But I'm always disappointed because the books, they focus on like a long list of animals and things in the house. And, really, I don't need to learn all of the... Because I will never use them even when I'm speaking. Sometimes I might say knife or spoon or fork. Sometimes. But it's not something that I'm going to be using in my foreign language very often.
Yeah.
The thing is, when we learn a foreign language, we want to talk with people. And so what we need are verbs.
Yeah.
And verbs are the hardest thing to translate because they change. There's so many changes in the verb. And verbs connect with so many different things in so many different ways. This is what brings you to fluency. And so, a lot of apps can be a little bit disappointing because they only focus on nouns. And I would say, to your audience, if you really want to improve your fluency, focus on your verbs. You don't need a lot of verbs, but master 100 or 200 verbs really well and in so many different ways. And keep using those verbs. And use a small set of verbs for a lot of sentence patterns. And then you are going to get closer to fluency. And then you will feel the need, the urge for more verbs. Oh, I need more verbs to express better. And then your vocabulary will start growing out of your need. Not because you have to memorize a list.